Before the first cities rose, before the first names were carved into stone, there is a blank space in the human story that refuses to stay blank. Not a missing year, a missing chapter. A rumor older than history, whispered in myths from Mesopotamia to the Nile, in flood stories, in tales of golden ages and sudden ruin. A race that supposedly walked the world before us, built, learned, ruled, and then vanished so completely that only echoes remain. Beautiful, maybe, but that is the surface. Beneath it lies a harder question. If something came before humanity, where are the bones, the tools, the ruins, the fingerprints in the earth? If they existed, what ended them? Fire, flood, ice, war, disease, or a slow collapse no one saw coming. And if they did not exist, then why do so many cultures remember something like them anyway? Who benefits from the idea of a forgotten first race? And what does that say about us? Tonight we follow the claims, the texts, and the science that can actually test a legend. We separate what we can prove from what we only want to believe, because the real mystery is not just who came before. It is why we keep searching for someone else to blame or someone else to admire when we look into the deepest past. If you enjoy deep investigations into ancient history, lost civilizations, and the line where myth meets evidence, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which mystery you want to explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Thank you for being here. Let's begin. At dawn on the Giza Plateau, the desert holds its breath. Before the heat rises and before the city noise reaches the sand, the pyramids stand in clean light, sharp edges against a pale sky. They do not feel ancient in this moment. They feel present. For more than 4,000 years they have faced the sun in the same way, asking the same quiet question. How were these built? Why were they built? And what did their builders believe they were doing? Modern voices often rush to extraordinary answers. Some claim the pyramids were not tombs at all, but machines, markers, or even beacons built for non-human visitors. These ideas spread easily because the structures are enormous, precise, and old beyond ordinary experience. But before reaching for the unknown, history asks us to slow down and look closely at what is actually here. The pyramids rise from a specific place, a specific time, and a specific human culture that left behind more evidence than many people realize. Giza was not chosen at random. It sits on the west bank of the Nile, the land of the dead in ancient Egyptian belief, where the sun appeared to die each evening before being reborn. This landscape mattered. The builders of the pyramids lived during Egypt's Old Kingdom, a period beginning around 2,600 years before the Common Era, when kings ruled through a powerful mix of religion, administration, and control of food. The pyramids were part of that system, not outside it. When the Great Pyramid was completed around 2560, before the Common Era, it was not an isolated object. It stood at the center of a vast complex of temples, causeways, smaller pyramids, and worker settlements. Every stone pointed toward an idea of order, balance, and eternal rule. The pyramids were built for kings who believed they would join the gods after death and help keep the universe stable. Their shape echoed the rays of the sun and the sacred mound of creation. This meaning is written into texts, carvings, and later religious writings, even if the pyramids themselves were left mostly uninscribed. Still, questions remain because the scale is overwhelming. Blocks weighing tons, alignments that seem exact, and construction methods that feel just out of reach invite speculation. In the modern world, where technology often feels invisible and mysterious, it is tempting to imagine lost knowledge or outside help. The idea of Anunnaki beacons belongs to this temptation. It takes a real ancient name from Mesopotamian religion and attaches it to Egyptian monuments without evidence. This chapter begins at dawn because clarity matters. Before theories, before myths, before wonder turns into fantasy, the pyramids ask us to look again at what humans can do when belief, power, labor, and time align. The question has never stopped being asked, but the answer begins on the ground, in the sand, under the rising sun. This investigation begins here, grounded in evidence, not assumption or fear and wonder. The idea that the pyramids were Anunnaki beacons begins with a simple claim. These structures were not tombs built by ancient Egyptians, but advanced signal towers designed or used by non-human beings to communicate across space. In modern versions, the pyramids are described as transmitters, receivers, or energy amplifiers, sometimes linked to stars, planets, or lost technologies. The appeal of the claim is easy to understand. The pyramids are massive, ancient, and precise. They appear to rise suddenly in history, already perfected. For many people, that combination feels too advanced for a society they imagine as primitive. Into that gap steps the Anunnaki explanation. To evaluate it seriously, the claim must be stated clearly and held to the same standard as any historical or scientific explanation. If the pyramids were alien beacons, then certain kinds of evidence would have to exist. There would need to be physical components that serve no known symbolic or structural purpose, materials chosen specifically for transmission or energy control, traces of power generation, or maintenance systems that cannot be explained within the technology of ancient Egypt. There would also need to be written or visual records that describe interaction with non-human builders or users, not vague references that can be stretched to fit modern ideas. When historians and archaeologists examine the pyramids, they begin with what can be observed and tested. The stones are limestone and granite, materials common to Egypt and used widely in temples, statues, and tombs. The internal passages follow structural logic, relieving weight and preventing collapse. The alignments, while impressive, fall within the limits of naked eye astronomy and simple surveying tools known from the period. No wiring, no chambers designed to house machines, no residues of fuels or exotic materials have been found. Every space can be explained as symbolic, structural, or ritual in function. Supporters of the beacon idea often point to precision as evidence of advanced knowledge, but precision alone does not indicate alien involvement. Ancient societies achieved high accuracy through repetition, skilled labor, and long time frames. The Egyptian state had the ability to mobilize thousands of workers, feed them, house them, and keep them working year after year. That kind of organization produces results that feel astonishing when viewed thousands of years later. Another key part of the Anunnaki claim is the use of ancient texts, especially from Mesopotamia. Names of gods are lifted from cuneiform tablets and reinterpreted as descriptions of space travelers, but historians read these texts in their original language and cultural setting. They describe divine beings, not engineers, and myths, not flight logs. No Egyptian text from the Old Kingdom describes the pyramids as machines or messages. They describe them as eternal houses for kings and as tools for reaching the afterlife. To claim the pyramids were beacons requires ignoring a large body of evidence while relying on speculation. The standard of proof matters. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. So far, that evidence has not appeared. To understand the Anunnaki, history requires leaving Egypt entirely and traveling east to Mesopotamia. The name Anunnaki comes from the ancient cultures of Sumer, Akkad, Assyria, and Babylon. societies that flourished between roughly 3,500 and 500 years before the Common Era in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. In their original context, the Anunnaki were not visitors from the sky in a technological sense. They were gods, powerful divine figures who belonged to a complex religious system that explained how the world worked, why kings ruled, and how order was maintained in a fragile environment. The word Anunnaki roughly means offspring of Anu, with Anu being the sky god and one of the highest deities in the Mesopotamian pantheon. The Anunnaki appear in cuneiform texts written on clay tablets, including myths, hymns, prayers, and legal or ritual documents. They are described as judges of the dead, decision-makers of fate, and enforcers of cosmic law. In some stories they dwell in the heavens, in others in the underworld, but always as supernatural beings, not physical travelers operating machines. These texts were written by scribes trained in religious tradition, not by observers recording historical events. The language is symbolic, poetic, and deeply tied to ritual belief. When Mesopotamian texts describe gods descending from the sky, they are speaking in mythic terms, not describing spacecraft or landing zones. Historians understand this because similar language appears across many ancient cultures, including Egypt, where gods were also said to descend, ascend, transform, and travel without those descriptions being taken literally. The Anunnaki were also not a single unified group with one role. Their functions change across time and cities. In early Sumerian texts, they appear as major gods associated with heaven and earth. In later Akkadian and Babylonian texts, they are more often linked to the underworld and judgment. This shift reflects changes in religious focus, not new discoveries or encounters. There is no moment in the Mesopotamian record where the Anunnaki are described as teachers of engineering, builders of monuments, or visitors to foreign lands like Egypt. They are local gods, embedded in local geography, politics, and ritual practice. Modern interpretations that describe the Anunnaki as extraterrestrials largely come from 20th century writers who read ancient texts outside their linguistic and cultural framework. Words associated with brightness, descent, or power were reimagined as references to technology. Titles given to gods were treated as job descriptions. Metaphors were read as literal reports. This approach ignores how ancient people understood their own writing. No Mesopotamian scribe believed they were recording a technical manual. They were preserving sacred stories meant to explain human suffering, divine authority, and the structure of the universe. Just as important, there is no evidence that the Anunnaki were ever part of Egyptian religion. Egyptian texts name their own gods, follow their own myths, and reflect a worldview that developed independently. The Anunnaki belong to Mesopotamia, not Giza. Understanding who they were historically does not reduce their importance, it clarifies it. They were gods of meaning, not engineers of stone. The idea that pyramids are alien structures did not appear in ancient times. It is a modern story, shaped by cultural trends that began in the 19th century. When European travelers and scholars first studied Egypt seriously, they arrived with romantic ideas and limited understanding. Early Egyptology mixed careful observation with speculation, symbolism, and spiritual mysticism. Writers spoke of lost wisdom, vanished civilizations, and secret knowledge hidden in stone. The pyramids were framed not as products of a known society, but as relics of something older and mysterious. This atmosphere created fertile ground for ideas that stretched beyond evidence. During the late 19th century, spiritual movements such as Theosophy blended Eastern religion, Western mysticism, and pseudo-history. Ancient monuments were reimagined as spiritual devices rather than political or religious structures. The pyramid became a symbol of universal power rather than a tomb built for a king. These interpretations were popular, but not based on archaeological method. They relied on intuition, symbolism, and selective reading, rather than excavation or primary texts. In the early 20th century, as archaeology became more scientific, many of these ideas faded from academic circles, but survived in popular culture. The next shift came after the Second World War, when rockets, satellites, and space exploration entered everyday imagination. Humanity had reached the edge of space, and the idea of visitors from elsewhere no longer felt impossible. In this context, ancient monuments were reinterpreted again. Writers began asking whether ancient people could have received help from advanced beings. In the 1968 book Chariots of the Gods, Erich von Däniken argued that ancient structures around the world were evidence of extraterrestrial contact. The pyramids featured heavily in this argument. Their size, precision, and age were presented as proof that humans could not have built them alone. Von Däniken did not rely on new archaeological discoveries. He relied on rhetorical questions and gaps in public knowledge. Academic scholars responded quickly, pointing out errors, misquoted sources, and misunderstandings of engineering and history. Despite this, the ancient astronaut idea spread widely through books, television, and later the internet. It thrived because it told a dramatic story and challenged authority. Over time, the Anunnaki were added to this framework. Names taken from Mesopotamian texts were merged with science fiction ideas. Gods became astronauts. Myths became reports. This blending ignored cultural boundaries. Egypt and Mesopotamia were treated as parts of one global alien project, rather than distinct civilizations with their own languages and beliefs. Primary sources tell a different story. Egyptian inscriptions, administrative records, tomb reliefs, and worker settlements consistently show pyramids as royal projects rooted in Egyptian religion. There is no break in the record where aliens appear. The alien pyramid story is not ancient. It is a mirror reflecting modern fears and hopes. It grows strongest when people feel disconnected from history and underestimate human capability. Separating mythology from evidence does not remove wonder. It replaces fantasy with a deeper respect for the people who actually built these monuments alone. Egypt, in the age of Khufu, was not a mysterious or primitive world. It was a highly organized state with strong leadership, deep religious belief, and an economy capable of supporting enormous projects. Khufu ruled during the 4th dynasty, around 2600 years before the Common Era, a time when Egypt was unified under a powerful central government. The king was not just a ruler, he was believed to be a living god, the link between humanity and the divine order known as Ma'at. Maintaining Ma'at meant keeping balance in the universe, and that responsibility shaped every major decision. Monument building was not decoration. It was a religious duty tied directly to cosmic stability. The state had the authority to command labor, collect resources, and plan decades into the future. This authority made pyramid building possible. The Nile River was the backbone of the economy. Each year it flooded predictably, leaving fertile soil that supported large harvests of grain. Agriculture produced surplus food, and surplus food supported specialists. Farmers could be redirected during the flood season when fields were underwater. Instead of farming, they worked on state projects. This system did not rely on slaves. It relied on obligation, seasonal labor, and payment in food, clothing, and shelter. The government tracked supplies carefully, storing grain in state granaries and redistributing it to workers. This economic structure allowed tens of thousands of people to work together for years without collapsing society. Religion shaped how this labor was understood. Building a pyramid was an act of devotion. The king's tomb was not just for his body. It was a machine of belief meant to help his soul rise to the heavens and continue protecting Egypt. The sun god Ra was central to 4th dynasty religion, and kings increasingly associated themselves with the sun. The pyramid shape reflected this connection, symbolizing rays of sunlight descending to earth. Texts and temple layouts reinforced this solar focus. Khufu's pyramid was part of a larger sacred landscape that included temples for rituals, offerings, and ongoing worship. Administratively, Egypt was divided into regions called nomes, each overseen by officials loyal to the king. These officials organized labor quotas, material shipments, and skilled craftsmen. Quarrying stone, transporting it along the Nile, and shaping it on site required planning, not miracles. Archaeological records show overseers, scribes, and foremen managing crews with names that reflected pride, loyalty, and identity. This was a national project, not a secret one. Khufu inherited knowledge from earlier kings. His father, Sneferu, had already built multiple large pyramids, experimenting with design and construction. By Khufu's reign, Egypt had decades of experience in stone monument building. The Great Pyramid did not appear suddenly. It was the result of accumulated skill, confidence, and ambition. Understanding Egypt in Khufu's time removes the need for outside explanations. The pyramids were born from a powerful state, a stable economy, and a belief system that demanded eternal monuments. They were human achievements shaped by belief, organization, and time, together enduring. A pyramid was never meant to stand alone. In ancient Egypt, it was one part of a carefully designed system built around death, kingship, and the afterlife. When modern viewers see a pyramid rising from the desert, it can feel isolated and mysterious, but to the people who built it, that shape was only the most visible element of a much larger sacred landscape. A royal pyramid functioned as the eternal home of a king and as a focal point for rituals meant to sustain him after death. The pyramid complex included a valley temple near the Nile, a long causeway connecting river to desert, a mortuary temple at the pyramid's base, smaller pyramids for queens, and mastaba tombs for officials. Every part had a role. Together they formed a bridge between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Egyptian belief held that death was not an end but a transition. The king possessed several spiritual components, including the Ka, the life force, and the Ba, the personality. For these aspects to survive, the body had to be preserved and sustained through offerings and ritual. The pyramid protected the king's body, while the surrounding temples supported daily ceremonies carried out by priests long after burial. Food, drink, incense, and spoken prayers were delivered to keep the king alive in another form. This was not symbolic only. Egyptians believed these actions had real effects in the unseen world. Kingship was central to this system. The king was more than a political leader. He was the guarantor of cosmic order. His successful transition into the afterlife ensured the sun would rise, the Nile would flood, and chaos would remain at bay. Building a pyramid was therefore an act of national importance. It was insurance for the future. The size and permanence of the structure reflected the seriousness of that responsibility. Solar religion shaped the pyramid's form and placement. During the 4th dynasty, kings increasingly associated themselves with the sun god Ra. The pyramid's sloping sides echoed rays of sunlight reaching down to earth. Its placement on the west bank aligned with the setting sun and the realm of the dead. Temples within the complex were oriented to the sun's movement, reinforcing the idea that the king would join Ra in his daily journey across the sky. This belief system is recorded in later pyramid texts, which describe the king ascending to the heavens, becoming a star, and sailing with the gods. These texts never describe machinery, signals, or communication with other worlds. They describe transformation, rebirth, and eternal rule. The pyramid was a religious tool, not a device in the modern sense. Its power came from belief, ritual, and continuity. Seeing pyramids as standalone, objects strips them of their meaning. They were built to be used, visited, and maintained through ceremonies for generations. Priests worked there daily, offerings were delivered, festivals passed through the complex. The pyramid was alive in function long after construction ended. Understanding what a pyramid was for makes one thing clear. It was designed to serve a king, a religion, and a society deeply concerned with eternity. Its purpose was human, spiritual, and grounded in the worldview of ancient Egypt, not in messages sent beyond the stars. The pyramids at Giza did not appear suddenly or fully formed. They were the result of a long process of trial, adjustment, and learning that unfolded over generations. Long before the Great Pyramid rose above the plateau, Egyptian builders experimented with ways to honor their kings in stone. The earliest royal tombs were mastabas, low rectangular structures made of mud brick or stone. These were effective for burial but limited in symbolic power. Over time, the desire to create something more permanent and more visible pushed architects to think upward rather than outward. This gradual shift marks the beginning of the pyramid tradition and shows a clear human learning curve rather than a single moment of outside intervention. The first major breakthrough came during the Third Dynasty under King Djoser, around 2,700 years before the Common Era. His step pyramid at Saqqara was designed by the official Imhotep and began as a mastaba before being expanded upward in stages. The final form stacked 6 levels, creating a stair-like structure reaching toward the sky. This was not yet a true pyramid, but it introduced the idea of monumental, vertical stone construction on a scale never attempted before. Archaeological evidence shows changes made during construction, indicating that the design evolved as builders learned what worked and what did not. The surrounding complex included temples, courtyards, and ceremonial spaces, establishing a pattern later refined at Giza. The next major phase came during the reign of Sneferu, father of Khufu. Sneferu built more large pyramids than any other Egyptian king, and each one reflects experimentation. At Meidum, builders attempted to convert a step pyramid into a smooth-sided pyramid by filling in the steps. The result eventually collapsed, leaving a core that still stands today. This failure was not hidden. It remains visible, a stone record of a lesson learned. Sneferu then turned to Dashur, where the bent pyramid reveals another adjustment. Partway up, the angle of the sides changes dramatically. This shift likely occurred because the original angle proved unstable. Rather than abandon the project, builders altered the design mid-construction. Nearby stands the Red Pyramid, Egypt's first successful true pyramid, with smooth sides from base to peak. By the time it was completed, Egyptian builders had mastered the basic principles of weight distribution, angle, and foundation. These projects occurred within a few decades, showing rapid learning driven by experience. By the time Khufu began his pyramid at Giza, Egypt had more than 70 years of large-scale pyramid building behind it. Techniques were refined, quarries were organized, labor systems were tested and improved. Surveying methods were practiced repeatedly. The Great Pyramid represents the peak of this process, not its beginning. Its precision reflects accumulated knowledge rather than sudden revelation. Each earlier pyramid left clues in stone, teaching builders what to repeat and what to avoid. This long road to Giza undercuts claims of sudden, advanced knowledge. The pyramids show mistakes, corrections, and progress. That pattern belongs to human history. It is the mark of skilled builders learning through effort, not outsiders delivering finished designs. The stones themselves tell this story, if we are willing to read them patiently. The pyramids at Giza did not appear suddenly or fully formed. They were the result of a long process of trial, adjustment, and learning that unfolded over generations. Long before the Great Pyramid rose above the plateau, Egyptian builders experimented with ways to honor their kings in stone. The earliest royal tombs were mastabas, low rectangular structures made of mud brick or stone. These were effective for burial, but limited in symbolic power. Over time, the desire to create something more permanent and more visible pushed architects to think upward rather than outward. This gradual shift marks the beginning of the pyramid tradition and shows a clear human learning curve rather than a single moment of outside intervention. The first major breakthrough came during the Third Dynasty under King Djoser, around 2700 years before the Common Era. His step pyramid at Saqqara was designed by the official Imhotep and began as a mastaba before being expanded upward in stages. The final form stacked 6 levels, creating a stair-like structure reaching toward the sky. This was not yet a true pyramid, but it introduced the idea of monumental, vertical stone construction on a scale never attempted before. Archaeological evidence shows changes made during construction, indicating that the design evolved as builders learned what worked and what did not. The surrounding complex included temples, courtyards, and ceremonial spaces, establishing a pattern later refined at Giza. The next major phase came during the reign of Sneferu, father of Khufu. Sneferu built more large pyramids than any other Egyptian king, and each one reflects experimentation. At Maidum, builders attempted to convert a step pyramid into a smooth-sided pyramid by filling in the steps. The result eventually collapsed, leaving a core that still stands today. This failure was not hidden. It remains visible, a stone record of a lesson learned. Sneferu then turned to Dashur, where the bent pyramid reveals another adjustment. Partway up, the angle of the sides changes dramatically. This shift likely occurred because the original angle proved unstable. Rather than abandon the project, builders altered the design mid-construction. Nearby stands the Red Pyramid, Egypt's first successful true pyramid with smooth sides from base to peak. By the time it was completed, Egyptian builders had mastered the basic principles of weight distribution, angle, and foundation. These projects occurred within a few decades, showing rapid learning driven by experience. By the time Khufu began his pyramid at Giza, Egypt had more than 70 years of large-scale pyramid building behind it. Techniques were refined, quarries were organized, labor systems were tested and improved, surveying methods were practiced repeatedly. The Great Pyramid represents the peak of this process, not its beginning. Its precision reflects accumulated knowledge rather than sudden revelation. Each earlier pyramid left clues in stone, teaching builders what to repeat and what to avoid. This long road to Giza undercuts claims of sudden advanced knowledge. The pyramids show mistakes, corrections, and progress. That pattern belongs to human history. It is the mark of skilled builders learning through effort, not outsiders delivering finished designs. The stones themselves tell this story, if we are willing to read them patiently. The true technology behind the pyramids was not hidden or lost. It was logistical. Moving millions of stone blocks weighing several tons each required planning on a national scale, not machines beyond human reach. Limestone for the core of the Great Pyramid was quarried directly on the Giza Plateau, reducing transport distance. Higher quality white limestone casing stones came from Tura, across the Nile, while granite for internal chambers travelled from Aswan, hundreds of miles to the south. These choices reflect practicality and resource management, not mystery. Quarry marks, unfinished blocks, and tool traces remain visible today, showing how stone was cut using copper tools, stone hammers, and wooden wedges soaked with water to split rock along natural seams. This process was slow but effective when multiplied across thousands of workers over many years. Transport was the next challenge. Ancient reliefs and archaeological finds show large blocks hauled on wooden sledges, pulled by teams of workers. One famous wall painting from the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep shows men pouring water in front of a sledge to reduce friction, a simple but powerful technique confirmed by modern physics experiments. Roads made of packed earth and stone connected quarries to building sites. Along the Nile, barges carried stone during flood season when water levels were high. The river acted as a natural highway, allowing heavy cargo to move with less effort. Timing mattered. Quarrying, hauling, and building followed seasonal rhythms tied to the Nile's flood, integrating monument construction into the wider economy. Ramps remain one of the most debated aspects of pyramid construction, but debate does not mean absence of evidence. Archaeologists agree that ramps of some form were used, though their exact configuration likely changed as the pyramid rose. Straight ramps, zigzagging ramps, and spiraling ramps are all possible, and evidence suggests combinations rather than a single design. Remains of ramps have been found at other pyramid sites and large construction projects from the same period. Ramps were built from mud brick, rubble, and limestone chips, materials easy to construct and dismantle. As the pyramid grew taller, ramps were adjusted, extended, or rebuilt. This adaptability fits the archaeological record of constant modification seen in other Egyptian monuments. Labor organization made the entire system work. Workers were divided into teams and sub-teams with names that reflected pride and loyalty, such as Friends of Khufu or Drunkards of Menkora. These names appear in graffiti left inside the pyramids themselves. This was not slave labor hidden in fear. It was a structured workforce, fed, housed, and managed by the state. Excavations near Giza have uncovered worker villages with bakeries, breweries, storage rooms, and medical care. Animal bones showed diets rich in meat and bread, indicating sustained provisioning. Skilled craftsmen shaped stone and managed alignment, while unskilled labourers hauled and prepared materials. Overseers coordinated schedules, and scribes recorded output. This was a system, not chaos. When viewed piece by piece, pyramid construction seems overwhelming. When viewed as an organised flow of resources, labour, and time, it becomes understandable. Stone weight was conquered by numbers. Logistics replaced magic. The pyramids stand not as proof of impossible technology, but as proof of what disciplined human systems can achieve when belief and state power align. The pyramids were not raised by invisible forces. They were built by people, thousands of them, whose lives revolved around the construction site for years. For a long time, popular imagination pictured slaves driven by whips, but archaeology has overturned that image. Excavations at Giza have revealed an entire workers' settlement south of the pyramids, a planned community that functioned like a small city. This was not a temporary camp. It had streets, houses, bakeries, breweries, storage buildings, and administrative spaces. The scale of the settlement matches the scale of the task. These workers were not disposable labour. They were a managed workforce supported by the state. Evidence from human remains shows that many workers suffered injuries that healed, meaning they received care and time to recover. Broken bones were set. Worn joints show hard labor, but also long-term survival. This points to an organized system that valued skilled and experienced workers. Food remains tell a similar story. Archaeologists have found large quantities of cattle, sheep, and goat bones. This was not a starvation diet. Meat was provided regularly, along with bread and beer, the staples of ancient Egypt. Supplying this much food required farms, herds, transport, and record-keeping. It was an extension of the national economy focused on a single project. Workers were divided into teams, often called gangs, each with its own identity. Graffiti left inside the pyramids records their names, which were proud and humorous rather than fearful. These teams rotated in shifts, allowing farmers to return to their fields when the Nile flood ended. This seasonal system spread the labor burden across the population and reinforced loyalty to the king. Skilled craftsmen formed another layer of the workforce. Stonecutters, masons, carpenters, and surveyors worked year-round. Their skill is visible in the precise joints, smooth surfaces, and careful placement of blocks. These men were specialists, likely trained over many years. They lived close to the site and enjoyed higher status and better housing than unskilled laborers. Overseers and scribes managed output and logistics. Records from later periods show how such systems worked, and the archaeological layout of Giza fits that model closely. Nothing about this system suggests secrecy or outside control. It was open, bureaucratic, and intensely human. The workers' village was positioned to allow easy access to the plateau while remaining separate from elite spaces. This separation reflects social order, not hidden truth. When construction ended, many workers likely returned to their home regions, carrying stories of their service and pride in contributing to a project meant to last forever. The pyramid was not just the king's monument. It was a national effort that tied identity, belief, and labor together. Ignoring these workers erases the real achievement. They are absent from popular images because stone endures longer than flesh. But the city they built to build the pyramid is still there in traces, telling a clear story. The wonder of the pyramids does not lie in unknown builders. It lies in the ordinary people organized on an extraordinary scale, sustaining a dream through food, skill, discipline, and time. Inside the Great Pyramid, there is no grand hall meant for crowds, and no space that suggests machinery. What exists is a tightly controlled internal layout designed to solve structural problems and serve a specific ritual purpose. The passages and chambers feel narrow, deliberate, and restrained because they were never meant to be lived in or visited regularly. They were engineered to protect a royal burial while supporting millions of tons of stone above. The entrance opens on the north face, leading into a descending passage cut directly into the bedrock. This passage slopes downward at a steady angle and connects the pyramid to the earth beneath it. Its function was symbolic and practical, linking the king to the underworld and providing access during construction. From this passage, a junction leads upward into what is known as the ascending passage. This change in direction was intentional, marking a transition from the realm below toward the sky. The Grand Gallery follows, a long corbelled corridor rising toward the center of the pyramid. Its walls step inward as they rise, reducing weight and channeling pressure outward. This was not decoration. It was engineering. The Grand Gallery likely served as a staging area during construction and later as part of the burial ritual process. Its scale feels dramatic compared to the rest of the interior, but it remains narrow and controlled, emphasizing function over display. At the base of the Grand Gallery lies the so-called Queen's Chamber, though no queen was buried there. Its purpose is still debated, but its position and unfinished appearance suggest it was part of an earlier plan that changed as construction progressed. Design changes inside the pyramid are important because they show adaptation. Plans were revised when better solutions emerged. That is how human builders work. Above the Grand Gallery sits the King's Chamber, constructed entirely of granite. This chamber held the sarcophagus, carved from a single block of stone and placed before the pyramid was completed. The chamber's most remarkable feature is not its size, but what lies above it. 5 relieving chambers stacked above the ceiling distribute the enormous weight away from the burial space. These chambers contain massive granite beams and rough, unfinished surfaces. No decoration, no mystery. Their purpose is clear. Without them, the chamber would collapse. Air shafts extend from the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber toward the exterior. These have often been misinterpreted as ventilation or signaling devices. In reality, they align with specific stars or regions of the sky, tied to royal afterlife beliefs. They are symbolic pathways for the king's soul, not tubes for sound, light, or energy. They are too narrow and irregular to function as conduits for any mechanical purpose. The interior of the Great Pyramid is silent, heavy, and constrained. Every feature answers a problem of weight, access, and belief. There is no space left over for technology that left no trace. What remains is architecture, doing exactly what it was meant to do. Protect the king, uphold cosmic order, and endure under pressure. To the ancient Egyptians, the pyramid was a machine, but not in a mechanical sense. It was a ritual engine designed to make the universe function as it should. Its purpose was to stabilize cosmic order, transform the dead king, and mirror the sacred structure of creation itself. Egyptian religion did not separate belief from reality. What was performed correctly in ritual was believed to produce real effects in the world. The pyramid operated within that logic. It was not symbolic decoration. It was an active tool meant to keep chaos from rising and order from collapsing. Central to this belief was Ma'at, the principle of balance, truth, and harmony. The king was responsible for maintaining Ma'at during his life, and after death he continued that role among the gods. If the king failed to transform properly, the balance of the world was at risk. Floods could fail, crops could die, enemies could triumph. The pyramid existed to prevent that outcome. Its mass and permanence expressed stability. Its geometry expressed order. Its orientation linked earth to sky in a way meant to guide the king's soul. This is how the pyramid functioned. The elevation of the king was another key function. Egyptian texts describe the dead king rising to the heavens, becoming a star, and joining the sun god in his daily cycle. The pyramid shape supported this idea. Its sloping sides acted as a visual and symbolic ramp, allowing ascent. The internal passages reinforced the journey, moving from darkness below to light above. The star-aligned shafts pointed toward regions of the sky associated with eternity. None of this required moving parts or energy flow in the modern sense. The belief was that correct form and correct placement activated the process. The pyramid also mirrored sacred forms tied to creation myths. Egyptian cosmology taught that the world began as a mound rising from the primeval waters. This first land, often called the Ben, was the place where creation began and the sun first appeared. The pyramid echoed this form, rising from the desert like a perfected version of the original mound. Temples often contained small Ben stones, reinforcing the connection between shape and cosmic origin. By enlarging this form to an unprecedented scale, the king aligned himself with the moment of creation itself. The pyramid was creation made permanent in stone. Daily rituals kept the machine running. Priests performed offerings, recited spells, and maintained the temples surrounding the pyramid. These actions were believed to feed the king's spirit and keep the system active. Even after burial, the pyramid complex remained in use. It was visited, serviced, and ritually maintained. A machine does not function once and stop. It requires ongoing input. In Egyptian belief, the pyramid worked as long as rituals continued. Viewing the pyramid this way explains its design choices. Massive stone was chosen for durability. Alignment mattered because the cosmos mattered. Redundancy in chambers and passages reflected concern for failure. This machine did not transmit signals or generate power. It generated continuity. It turned death into stability and time into eternity. Understanding this makes the pyramid no less astonishing. It makes it intelligible within the world that built it. The pyramid's relationship with the stars is real and well documented, but that reality is often stretched into something it was never meant to be. Ancient Egyptians watched the night sky closely, not out of scientific curiosity alone, but because the heavens were tied directly to eternity. Certain stars never set below the horizon. These circumpolar stars appeared to circle the north forever, without dying. To Egyptian belief, this made them symbols of immortality. The dead king was expected to join them and live eternally among the gods. This belief explains why north mattered so much in pyramid design. Aligning a structure toward the north was not about pointing outward, it was about anchoring the king's fate to an unchanging region of the sky. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with impressive accuracy, and its internal shafts point toward areas of the sky associated with these eternal stars. This fact is often presented as evidence of signaling or communication. But alignment is not transmission. A window facing the sunrise does not send light to the sun. It simply acknowledges it. The so-called star shafts from the king's chamber and queen's chamber are narrow, uneven, and sealed. They are not straight pipes designed for sound or energy to travel efficiently. They do not exit the pyramid in a usable way, and some were blocked from the start. Their angles correspond roughly to star positions around 2,500 years before the Common Era, when precession placed different stars in the northern sky. These alignments reflect symbolic targeting, not mechanical function. Egyptian texts reinforce this interpretation. Pyramid texts written slightly later describe the king ascending to the sky, becoming an imperishable star, and taking his place among the circumpolar constellations. The language is poetic and religious. It speaks of climbing ladders of light and sailing celestial boats. No text describes sending messages, receiving instructions, or contacting other beings through architecture. The stars were destinations, not correspondence. The temptation to see signals comes from modern habits of thought. In a world filled with antennas, satellites, and broadcasts, pointing toward the sky feels technological. But ancient people did not think this way. For them, direction carried meaning without function in the modern sense. Temples faced the sun not to capture energy, but to honor cycles. Statues faced specific directions to participate in sacred order. Orientation was belief made visible. When modern theories claim the pyramids broadcast something, they quietly add missing elements that never existed. There is no power source, there is no modulation system, there is no evidence of maintenance or recalibration. A beacon without these features is not a beacon. It is a symbol misread through modern eyes. The pyramids point to the stars because the stars represented eternity, that is enough. Turning that gesture into technology misunderstands both the monument and the people who built it. Understanding their sky does not diminish wonder. It restores meaning. Their astronomy guided belief, ritual, and identity, not communication across space itself. When the beacon idea is tested against the physical materials of the pyramids, it begins to fail at a basic level. Materials matter. Any structure meant to transmit signals or energy must be built from substances chosen for conduction, emission, or amplification. The pyramids were not. The Great Pyramid is built primarily from limestone, a sedimentary rock composed largely of calcium carbonate. Limestone is durable, abundant in Egypt, and easy to quarry, which explains its use. It is also a poor conductor of electricity and does not naturally amplify energy. In construction, limestone acts more like insulation than a transmitter. If the goal were to send signals, this would be an odd choice. Granite was used more selectively, mainly in internal chambers such as the King's Chamber and in structural elements like portcullis blocks. Granite does contain quartz, which modern audiences often associate with electronics, but quartz alone does not create usable energy or transmission. In modern devices, quartz is cut, wired, and paired with power sources and circuits. In the pyramid, granite blocks are massive, irregular, and unshaped for any precision electrical role. Their purpose is structural. Granite is strong under compression, making it ideal for bearing weight and relieving stress in critical areas. The relieving chambers above the King's Chamber use granite beams specifically to redirect pressure, not to interact with energy. The casing stones add another layer to this discussion. Originally, the Great Pyramid was covered in smooth white limestone casing stones, polished to a fine finish. These stones reflected sunlight and gave the pyramid a bright, unified appearance. Symbolically, this reinforced solar connections and divine purity. Functionally, the casing protected the core from erosion. It did not create an antenna or reflective dish. The stones were fitted tightly, leaving no gaps for airflow, wiring, or emission. Most of these casing stones were later removed in medieval times, yet no hidden mechanisms were revealed beneath them. Insulation is another overlooked factor. The pyramid's interior maintains relatively stable temperatures. Thick stone walls block heat, sound, and external influence. This is excellent for preservation and ritual silence. It is terrible for broadcasting anything outward. Any signal generated inside would be absorbed and dampened by the surrounding mass. There are no channels designed to carry energy efficiently from the center to the exterior. The small shafts are narrow, rough, and blocked, unsuitable for transmission. Wear patterns also matter. Structures used as machines show signs of use, modification, and maintenance. The pyramid does not. There are no residues, scorch marks, altered surfaces, or replaced components that suggest repeated mechanical activity. What wear exists comes from gravity, settling, and later human intrusion. Everything points to a structure meant to endure unchanged. The materials chosen tell a consistent story. They prioritize permanence, weight, and protection. They align with tomb building, not device construction. The beacon narrative requires us to believe that ancient builders selected materials that actively prevent the very function being claimed. That is not a reasonable assumption. The pyramids endure because stone was chosen for timelessness. Their silence is built in. The materials do not whisper of hidden technology. They speak clearly of human intention focused on eternity, not transmission. Every machine leaves a trail, no matter how advanced, It requires power, control, output, and upkeep. When the pyramid is claimed to be a beacon, the first question is not mystical. It is practical. Where is the hardware? A beacon needs a power source. It needs a way to turn on and off. It needs a mechanism to generate a signal and a path to release it. It also needs evidence of maintenance, because no machine operates forever without adjustment. Inside the Great Pyramid, none of these elements exist. There is no chamber that could house fuel. There are no residues of combustion, chemical reaction, or energy generation. No ash, no corrosion, no byproducts. Ancient Egyptian builders left clear traces when they used fire, tools, or industrial processes elsewhere. Kilns, smelting sites, and workshops leave unmistakable evidence. The pyramid interior does not. It is clean in a way that suggests stillness, not activity. Control systems are also absent. A beacon would require some method of regulation, something to start, transmission, stop it, or adjust it. There are no movable parts inside the pyramid designed for repeated use. The portcullis blocks and stone plugs, often cited by alternative theories, were sealing devices meant to close passages permanently after burial. Once in place, they were not intended to move again. That is the opposite of a switch. Emitters are equally missing. There is no feature designed to focus, direct, or project energy outward. The pyramid does not narrow toward an outlet. It broadens, absorbs, and seals. The small shafts, often pointed to as conduits, are too narrow, too rough, and in some cases were never open to the exterior at all. They do not converge on a focal point. They do not show wear from flow. They are symbolic passages, not functional ducts. Maintenance traces are perhaps the strongest absence. Machines demand care. Parts wear down. Surfaces polish. Components are replaced. Even ancient water systems and mills show cycles of repair. The pyramid shows none of this. Once sealed, it was meant to remain untouched. The burial chamber was not revisited for service. There were no access points for technicians, no storage for tools, no pathways worn smooth by repeated traffic. The design assumes finality. Some argue that advanced technology could leave no trace, but this argument dissolves under scrutiny. Even highly advanced systems interact with their environment. They produce heat. They alter materials. They leave patterns. The pyramid interior is dominated by gravity and silence. Its challenges were structural, not operational. Builders focused on keeping weight from crushing chambers and sealing the king safely inside. The solutions they used matched those goals exactly. The missing hardware problem is not a small gap, it is total. To accept the beacon theory, one must assume a machine that requires no power, no controls, no output path, and no maintenance, yet somehow performs a complex function indefinitely. That is not engineering. That is imagination filling empty space. The pyramid does not fail as a beacon because evidence was lost. It fails because evidence was never there. What remains is a structure perfectly suited to its real purpose: to endure, to protect, and to remain silent forever. The idea that pyramids concentrate or generate energy did not come from ancient Egypt. It developed slowly in the modern world, shaped by experiment, misinterpretation, and repetition without verification. In the 20th century, small-scale pyramid models began appearing in popular books and magazines. Claims followed that objects placed inside these models stayed sharper, fresher, or more energized. Razor blades were said to resharpen themselves. Food was said to preserve longer. People claimed improved sleep or focus. These stories spread widely because they were easy to test at home and difficult to disprove without controlled conditions. What they lacked was consistency. When scientists and engineers examined these claims under controlled settings, the results did not hold. Physics demands repeatability. If a shape concentrates energy, it must do so predictably and measurably. Independent experiments conducted with proper controls showed no consistent effects beyond normal environmental variation. Changes in humidity, airflow, temperature, and human expectation explained most reported results. When these factors were removed, the pyramid effect disappeared. Shape alone does not create energy. Energy must come from somewhere. The Great Pyramid itself does not show signs of energy concentration. Instruments placed inside detect nothing unusual. Magnetic fields, radiation levels, and temperature gradients remain within normal ranges for a stone structure of its size. The pyramid does not amplify natural forces like the Earth's magnetic field in any measurable way. If it did, sensitive modern equipment would detect it immediately. None does. Proponents often shift the claim when measurements fail. Energy becomes undefined. It is described as subtle, spiritual, or beyond current science. At that point, the claim leaves the realm of physics and enters belief. There is nothing wrong with belief, but it cannot be tested as engineering. Ancient Egyptians themselves never described the pyramid as an energy device. Their texts speak of power in religious terms, not physical force. Power meant authority, order, and divine favor. It did not mean electricity or radiation. When modern language is projected backward, meanings become confused. The pyramid shape does have physical properties. It is stable. It distributes weight efficiently. It resists erosion when built correctly. These are engineering advantages, not energetic ones. Any large stone structure will influence airflow and temperature slightly, but these effects are passive and limited. They do not scale into concentrated energy fields. Modern claims also suffer from selective attention. Experiments that fail are ignored. Experiments that appear to succeed are repeated without controls. Over time, a myth builds momentum simply through repetition. The slow-motion spread of the energy pyramid idea mirrors other pseudo-scientific trends. It thrives where curiosity outpaces skepticism. It offers wonder without demanding evidence. Archaeology provides a corrective. Excavations reveal how pyramids were built, used, and understood. They show no concern for energy flow or enhancement. The builders cared about alignment, durability, and ritual meaning. Those goals explain the form fully. The pyramid does not need hidden forces to inspire awe. Its real power lies in human coordination across generations. The energy myth fades when examined carefully, not because it is attacked, but because it is unnecessary. The pyramid stands without it, heavy, silent, and complete, grounded in stone and belief rather than in visible forces. When historians ask what the pyramids were, they turn first to what ancient Egyptians said themselves. The written record does not begin with guesses or modern theories. It begins with inscriptions, reliefs, and funerary texts created by the people who built and used these monuments. While the Great Pyramid itself contains no carved texts, later pyramids and surrounding temples do, and they speak with remarkable consistency. The earliest pyramid texts appear inside royal pyramids, starting around 2,400 years before the Common Era. These texts are not technical manuals. They are spells, prayers, and declarations meant to guide the dead king through the afterlife. They describe ascent to the sky, joining the gods, becoming an imperishable star, and taking a place beside the sun god Ra. The pyramid is repeatedly referenced as a stairway, a ladder, or a place of transformation. It is an aid to rebirth, not a device for communication. The language is symbolic, direct, and religious. It assumes a world governed by divine order, not machinery. Administrative texts add another layer. Records from work crews, overseers, and officials describe quarrying, hauling, provisioning, and labor organization. These documents treat pyramid building as a state project managed through bureaucracy. They record deliveries of food, stone, and tools. They name teams and supervisors. They never mention secret knowledge, external instructors, or unfamiliar technology. The tone is practical and human. Temple inscriptions near pyramids reinforce the same message. They describe offerings made to sustain the king's spirit. They outline rituals performed daily by priests. They emphasize continuity. The pyramid is part of a functioning religious system that depends on ongoing human action. If the pyramid were a beacon or machine, one would expect some reference to its operation, its purpose, or its extraordinary nature. None appears. Instead, texts focus on stability, eternity, and service to the gods. What is missing is as important as what is present. Egyptian texts never describe the pyramids as tools for contacting beings from elsewhere. They never describe power generation, energy flow, or signal transmission. They never hint at assistance from non-human builders. Egyptian scribes were thorough. They recorded divine genealogies, mythic battles, ritual instructions, and even mundane accounting. Silence on technology is not an accident. It reflects absence, not secrecy. Later funerary literature, such as the coffin texts and the Book of the Dead, continue the same themes. They speak of judgment, protection, and rebirth. They reference tombs and sacred spaces as places of transition. They do not reinterpret pyramids as anything other than sacred architecture. Across centuries, as beliefs evolved, the core understanding remained. The pyramid was a means to eternity, grounded in stone and ritual. Modern reinterpretations often rely on selective reading or mistranslation. Words for light, ascent, or power are lifted from poetic contexts and treated as literal descriptions of technology. This ignores how ancient languages functioned. Metaphor was central. Gods flew, shone, and descended without implying physical machines. When read carefully, the texts are clear. The pyramids were not mysterious to their builders. They were meaningful. They did exactly what Egyptians believed they should do. They carried kings into eternity and helped keep the world in balance. What the texts actually say leaves little room for beacons. What they never say matters just as much. When claims connect the Anunnaki to the pyramids, the first test is chronological. History depends on time. If two traditions are linked, their timelines must overlap in a meaningful way and show evidence of contact. When the dates are placed side by side, the connection weakens quickly. The Anunnaki belong to Mesopotamian religion, which developed in a different region, language, family, and cultural system than ancient Egypt. The earliest Sumerian city-states emerged around 3,500 years before the Common Era. References to gods later grouped under the name Anunnaki appear gradually in Sumerian and Akkadian texts over many centuries. These texts reflect local concerns about kingship, agriculture, justice, and the natural forces shaping life between the rivers. Egyptian pyramid building began later. The first true pyramids appear during the 3rd dynasty, around 2,700 years before the Common Era, and reached their peak during the 4th dynasty under kings like Sneferu and Khufu. By the time the Great Pyramid was completed around 2560 before the Common Era, Egyptian religious concepts were already well developed and distinct. The gods, myths, and rituals of Egypt had their own deep roots stretching back through predynastic times. There is no sudden appearance of foreign religious language or imagery at Giza that would suggest outside influence from Mesopotamia. The Anunnaki themselves are not a fixed group across time. In early Sumerian texts, they appear as major deities associated with heaven and earth. In later Akkadian and Babylonian traditions, they become judges of the underworld. Their roles shift with political and religious change. This fluid identity makes it difficult to map them onto a single function, let alone connect them to a specific architectural project in another land. Egyptian gods show a similar internal evolution, but that evolution happens within Egypt, not through borrowing Anunnaki concepts. Trade and contact between regions did exist. Egypt traded with the Levant and had indirect connections to Mesopotamia through intermediaries, but trade leaves traces. Imported goods, shared artistic styles, borrowed words, and hybrid religious symbols appear where cultures interact deeply. In the Old Kingdom record, such traces are minimal and limited. There is no evidence of Mesopotamian religious influence shaping Egyptian royal tombs. The pyramids follow Egyptian tradition, not foreign models. The timeline also matters for technology. Claims that Anunnaki taught Egyptians advanced knowledge would require evidence of sudden change. Archaeology shows the opposite. Pyramid construction techniques evolve gradually over decades. Mistakes are made, corrected, and improved upon. This slow progression fits human learning. It does not fit a moment of instruction from an advanced source. If such teaching occurred, it left no trace in texts, tools, or practice. When timelines are aligned honestly, the Anunnaki and the pyramids occupy separate historical paths. They belong to different cultures, solving different problems with different beliefs. The idea that they intersect arises not from evidence, but from modern desire to connect distant mysteries. History resists that pull. Dates do not bend to speculation. They anchor understanding. When the clocks are compared, the Anunnaki remain in Mesopotamia, and the pyramids remain Egyptian. When archaeologists talk about contact between cultures, they rely on specific kinds of evidence. Contact leaves patterns. It leaves objects, words, styles, and shared practices that can be traced across regions. Real cultural links are not guessed from distance or appearance. They are demonstrated through material remains found in the ground. Trade routes leave foreign goods in domestic settings. Shared religious ideas leave blended symbols. Borrowed technologies leave transitional forms. These markers allow historians to map how ideas and materials moved. When these standards are applied to claims about pyramids and alien influence, the case collapses. Similar shapes are not proof of shared purpose. Pyramidal forms appear in many places because stacking layers is a stable way to build upward with stone or earth. Gravity encourages similar solutions. A pyramid shape distributes weight evenly and resists collapse. This explains why stepped mounds appear in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, and elsewhere without any need for connection. In each case, the form arises from local materials, local beliefs, and local needs. Archaeology shows this clearly. Egyptian pyramids are built of stone and tied to royal burials. Mesopotamian ziggurats are built of mud brick and serve as temple platforms. Mesoamerican pyramids function as ritual stages for ceremonies. The shapes resemble each other in outline, but their construction methods, purposes, and cultural meanings differ. That difference is evidence of independent development, not coordination. When cultures do influence each other, the record reflects it. Egypt's contact with Nubia, for example, is visible in shared artistic motifs, burial practices, and imported goods. Trade with the Levant leaves pottery and materials from distant regions. These links are traceable and specific. By contrast, no Mesopotamian objects appear at Giza connected to pyramid construction. No Egyptian religious texts reference foreign gods guiding monument design. No tools or techniques appear suddenly that cannot be traced through Egyptian development. The absence of these markers is telling. Claims of alien purpose often rely on global patterning. Pyramids appear on different continents, therefore they must share a hidden origin. This reasoning skips the hard work of archaeology. It ignores chronology, context, and material culture. Similar problems often produce similar solutions. Humans everywhere build upward when they want permanence and visibility. The pyramid shape solves that problem efficiently. That does not require shared instruction, human or otherwise. Archaeology also values negative evidence. When something should be present but is not, that absence matters. If there were a shared alien blueprint behind pyramid building, we would expect common measurements, materials, inscriptions, or technologies across cultures. We do not see that. Instead, we see local variation and adaptation. Each culture shaped the form to fit its own worldview. Trade and contact explain similarities when they exist. Independent invention explains them when they do not. The pyramids fit firmly in the second category. Understanding what counts as a real link protects history from becoming a collage of coincidence. It grounds interpretation in evidence rather than imagination. The pyramids do not point to a shared alien purpose. They point to shared human problem-solving under different skies. The idea that the pyramids are too advanced to be human achievements is less about evidence and more about psychology. When people encounter something massive, ancient, and precise, the mind looks for shortcuts. It feels easier to believe in a missing answer than to accept the scale of planning and labor involved. The phrase "too advanced" often reveals more about modern assumptions than ancient reality. Many people picture ancient societies as small, disorganized, and technologically simple. That picture is wrong. Ancient Egypt was complex, bureaucratic, and capable of long-term coordination. Underestimating that capacity creates a gap, and that gap invites non-human explanations. There is also a strong emotional pull in mystery. Aliens offer a clean and dramatic answer. They remove the need to understand agriculture, taxation, labor rotation, or religious motivation. They replace slow human effort with sudden intervention. This satisfies curiosity without demanding patience. It also flatters modern audiences by implying that even today we might struggle to match what was done long ago. In this way, the alien answer can feel respectful, but it often has the opposite effect. It quietly dismisses ancient people as incapable of their own achievements. This pattern has appeared before. In the past, European writers claimed African or indigenous monuments must have been built by lost white civilizations because they could not imagine local populations creating them. Today, aliens sometimes fill the same role. The form of the claim has changed, but the assumption beneath it remains. Another factor is scale blindness. Humans struggle to imagine very large numbers. Millions of stone blocks and tens of thousands of workers over decades do not fit easily into the mind. The result feels impossible even when each individual step is understandable. When the process is broken down, Quarrying, hauling, feeding, organizing, the mystery fades. But that breakdown takes effort, and mystery often feels more exciting. There is also the influence of modern technology. We live surrounded by devices we do not understand in detail. Phones, satellites, and networks feel magical to most users. When we project that mindset backward, ancient monuments begin to feel like devices too. The pyramid becomes something to decode rather than something to contextualize. This is a modern habit imposed on an ancient world. Social reinforcement plays a role as well. Alien theories thrive in media environments that reward shock and novelty. A careful explanation of labor logistics does not travel as fast as a claim about hidden beacons. Repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity can be mistaken for truth. Over time, the idea feels established, even when it rests on nothing solid. Accepting a human explanation requires respect for ancient intelligence and endurance. It requires acknowledging that people without modern machines could still organize, measure, and build at scale. It also requires letting go of the idea that progress is always linear. Ancient societies were not children waiting for instruction. They were adults solving problems with the tools and beliefs they had. The pyramids challenge modern pride as much as they inspire wonder. The non-human answer feels comfortable because it avoids that challenge. But history becomes richer when we resist it. Recognizing what humans achieved on the Giza Plateau does not shrink the monument. It enlarges our understanding of what organized belief and collective effort can accomplish. The real mystery of the pyramids is not how they were built, but how they were paid for. Stone does not move itself, and workers do not labor for decades without support. Every block placed at Giza represents food grown, stored, and redistributed. It represents authority strong enough to command time and effort on a national scale. In ancient Egypt, pyramid building was an economic act as much as a religious one. The state made it possible through taxation, agriculture, and centralized power. The Nile River was the foundation of this system. Each year, its flood renewed the soil and created predictable harvests. That predictability allowed planners to estimate surplus. Grain was collected as tax, stored in granaries, and redistributed to support projects beyond daily survival. This surplus fed workers, craftsmen, priests, and administrators. Without it, pyramid building would have been impossible. The cost was not paid in coins, but in calories, labor days, and materials redirected from other uses. The king stood at the center of this system. As divine ruler, he claimed a portion of Egypt's output not as personal wealth, but as state resource. Officials managed this flow. Scribes recorded deliveries. Overseers allocated rations. The scale of the pyramid reflects the scale of state control. When thousands of workers ate meat, bread, and beer every day at Giza, that food came from farms across the country. Each village contributed indirectly. Pyramid building tied the population into a shared project that reinforced loyalty and identity. Agriculture also set the labor calendar. During the flood season, when fields were underwater, farmers could not work their land. This period freed large numbers of people for state labor without reducing food production. These workers were not permanently removed from their homes. They rotated in and out, spreading the burden. This system transformed a natural pause in agriculture into an opportunity for construction. It was efficient and sustainable within the ancient economy. Materials added another layer of cost. Quarrying stone required tools, transport, and skilled labor. Barges on the Nile moved heavy loads that would have been impossible over land alone. Maintaining these barges and waterways was itself an investment. Roads, ramps, and storage yards had to be built and maintained. None of this happened spontaneously. It required planning across years and reigns. State power enforced participation. Refusing labor or tax obligations was not an option. But participation also carried meaning. Serving the king meant serving the gods and securing the future of the land. The pyramid justified its own expense by promising stability. If the king became eternal, Egypt would endure. This belief converted economic cost into religious necessity. The question of funding also explains why pyramids changed over time. When resources tightened or priorities shifted, pyramid size and quality adjusted. Later, pyramids are smaller and built with less stone. This reflects economic reality, not lost knowledge. The Fourth Dynasty represented a peak moment when surplus, authority, and ambition aligned. That alignment paid for a stone mountain. Understanding this replaces mystery with scale. The pyramids were not free. They consumed enormous resources. They reshaped the economy around them. That cost was the point. It demonstrated the power of the state and the seriousness of belief. The real question was never who else helped build them. It was how a society chose to spend so much to make eternity visible in stone. Archaeology is powerful, but it has limits, and understanding those limits is essential when evaluating extraordinary claims. What archaeology can prove comes from material evidence, context, and repetition. Stones, tools, texts, human remains, and landscapes form patterns that allow researchers to reconstruct how people lived and what they believed. At Giza, these patterns are dense and consistent. We can trace quarry sites, worker villages, food supplies, burial practices, religious texts, and construction methods. Together, they create a coherent picture of pyramid building as a human enterprise rooted in Egyptian society. Archaeology proves that the pyramids were built during the Old Kingdom, that they were royal tombs, and that they were part of a broader religious and economic system. It proves who paid, who worked, and how resources moved. What archaeology cannot do is answer every detail with absolute certainty. We do not know the exact shape of every ramp. We cannot reconstruct every decision made on every day of construction. Gaps exist, and they always will. Those gaps are where speculation tries to enter. Evidence-based reconstruction fills gaps carefully, using comparisons, experiments, and probability. It asks what is most consistent with what we already know. Speculation, by contrast, often ignores context and leaps to conclusions that cannot be tested. The pyramids are a clear case study in this difference. When archaeologists debate ramp designs, they test models against physics, materials, and traces left on the ground. When speculative theories propose beacons or alien involvement, they do not test against the same standards. They often rely on what is missing rather than what is present. Absence becomes proof rather than a prompt for caution. Archaeology also depends on reproducibility. Excavations can be revisited, findings can be reanalyzed, new technology can refine old conclusions. Claims about hidden energy or lost machines do not offer this pathway. They cannot be falsified because they are not grounded in material evidence. This is why they remain beliefs rather than explanations. Another boundary is intention. Archaeology can show how something was built and used. It infers intention through patterns, not personal testimony. In the case of the pyramids, intention is reinforced by texts, art, and later tradition. The same religious ideas appear again and again across centuries. This continuity strengthens interpretation. When a theory requires ignoring that continuity, it moves outside archaeological reasoning. It is also important to recognize that archaeology does not reduce wonder. Explaining how the pyramids were built does not make them smaller. It makes them larger by revealing the scale of coordination and belief involved. The discipline respects ancient people enough to take their achievements seriously. Speculation often does the opposite by suggesting they could not have done what the evidence shows they did. The boundary between archaeology and speculation is not about imagination. It is about responsibility to evidence. Archaeology invites imagination to work within limits. Speculation asks imagination to replace limits. At Giza, the stones themselves enforce those limits. They anchor interpretation to earth, labor, and time. Understanding what archaeology can and cannot prove keeps the pyramids where they belong, in history, not floating free as symbols onto which anything can be projected. To test the beacon theory fairly, we start by stating it in its strongest form. The Great Pyramid is precise, aligned to true north, built with vast stone blocks, and cut through with narrow shafts aimed toward the sky. Some argue these features are not only symbolic. They claim the pyramid was designed to focus energy, send a signal, or act as a marker for visitors from elsewhere. In this version, the builders either received instruction from advanced beings, or the structure was later used by them in ways we no longer understand. First comes engineering. A beacon needs power, control, and an output path. The pyramid shows none. There is no evidence of fuel storage, wiring routes, heat scarring, chemical residues, or sockets for equipment. The internal design is optimized for weight management, not operation. Granite beams and relieving chambers exist to keep a ceiling from crushing a room, not to house devices. The ceiling blocks and plugged passages function as security, not as switches meant to be used again. If a signal ever existed, it would need an emitter and a pathway designed to release it efficiently, and those features are missing. Next comes materials. Limestone makes up most of the monument, and limestone is a poor choice for any electrical or radio concept. Granite contains quartz, but quartz is not a transmitter on its own. In modern technology, it works only when cut, wired, and powered in precise ways inside a circuit. The pyramid contains no such arrangements. The original casing stones were smooth and bright, but that supports solar symbolism and weather protection, not antenna design. A machine built mainly from insulating mass is a strange machine. Then come the texts. Egyptian religious writings describe pyramids as eternal houses for kings and as pathways to the sky. They speak of the king joining the imperishable stars and sailing with the sun god. But they do not describe devices, broadcasts, or not human builders. Administrative documents point to organized quarrying, provisioning, and labor teams with prideful names. Mesopotamian texts that mention the Anunnaki belong to a different culture and are religious narratives, not technical reports, and they do not connect to Giza. Finally, archaeology. At Giza, we find worker settlements, bakeries, breweries, tools, quarry marks, and construction graffiti. We find a human city built to build a human monument. We also find a long development path from step pyramids to true pyramids, including failures and mid-build design changes that look like learning. No exotic materials appear. No shared global blueprint appears. What survives after these tests is mostly mood. The pyramids feel beyond ordinary experience, so an extraordinary explanation is tempting. But when the claim is run against engineering, materials, texts, and archaeology, it loses its foundation. The pyramid remains astonishing, but it is astonishing as evidence of human organization, belief, and patience, not as a silent beacon waiting to be activated today. If the pyramids were not beacons, then what endures is something both simpler and more demanding. They endure as human monuments to belief, labor, and state power brought into alignment at a rare moment in history. The pyramids show what happens when an entire society commits to an idea of eternity and organizes itself to make that idea real. They are not mysteries because they are unexplained. They are profound because they are explained and still difficult to grasp. Ancient Egypt believed that the stability of the world depended on order, and that order depended on the king. The pyramid was the physical expression of that belief. It turned ideology into architecture. It transformed religious conviction into stone so massive that it could outlast generations, dynasties, and even belief itself. That is not lesser than a beacon, it is heavier. It required agriculture efficient enough to feed thousands of workers for decades. It required taxation strong enough to redirect surplus away from daily life and into monument building. It required administration capable of tracking labor, supplies, and schedules across a wide territory. It required skilled craftsmen who understood stone, measurement, and structure. None of this happened by accident. It was sustained by the Nile, enforced by authority, and justified by religion. The pyramid is a snapshot of a system operating at full capacity. Labor is the other enduring truth. The pyramid was built by hands that hauled, cut, shaped, and placed stone day after day. These workers lived nearby, ate regularly, healed from injuries, and returned home when their shift ended. Their names appear scratched into stone, not hidden away. They were proud of their work. The monument preserves their effort even if it does not preserve their faces. To deny their role by replacing them with aliens is to erase the most remarkable part of the story. State capacity is the final pillar. Only a centralized government with long-term vision could sustain a project that would not be completed within a single farming season or even a single rain. The pyramid was an investment in the future, not a tool for immediate gain. It demanded patience and confidence that the system would endure long enough to finish it. That confidence proved justified. The pyramid still stands. The endurance of the pyramids does not depend on hidden technology. It depends on visible commitment. Stone was chosen because it lasts. Shape was chosen because it resists collapse. Location was chosen because it aligned belief, geography, and transport. Every decision points inward toward continuity, not outward toward contact. The pyramids astonish because they force modern observers to confront the limits of their assumptions. They remind us that ancient societies could think big, plan far ahead, and act collectively without modern machines. They show that belief can mobilize resources as effectively as fear or profit. In the end, the pyramids do not need to be something else to be extraordinary. They do not need to whisper to the stars to matter. They speak clearly enough from the ground they rise from. They endure as proof that human systems, when driven by ideology and supported by organization, can reshape landscapes and time itself. That truth is harder to accept than aliens, but it is far more powerful, and it never left Earth.